Okay, so you're with a friend, you're hearing them tell you a story, and their voice rises in a question at the end of their sentence. You panic a little bit and you're nodding, trying to figure out how to respond. You had been too busy thinking of a similar situation that you were in that you just kind of wanted to tell them about, and you got caught up in the response and forgot to listen. Unfortunately, this wasn't the first time you're a bad listener, and it likely won't be your last, unless you actively work to improve your listening. We're all listeners. And there will just as surely be a time in the future for us to listen as there will be for us to talk. So it's important to catch our poor listening behaviors so that we can be more active listeners when the need arises. We can practice and teach ourselves more effective listening skills so that the people that we're listening to really feel our interest in what they're saying. It'll strengthen our connections and relationships, and that can only be beneficial for everyone involved. Because whether it's good or bad, listening is the foundation on which relationships are built and maintained. Someone who both speaks and listens, I can share with you how it feels on both ends to be in a conversation as active listener and one that doesn't. I've looked at the resources in our class for listening, as well as researched some other sources that are widely available to help build a foundation for good listening and to strengthen relationships. So today I'll be talking about how inactive conversations can create tension in relationships, how an active conversation benefits all parties involved, and finally we'll go over some techniques to improve our listening skills. To start, poor listening skills are incredibly harmful to healthy relationships. When you're a listener in a conversation with poor listening skills, you'll struggle throughout the entire conversation. According to Celeste Headlee in her speech, 10 Ways to Have a Better Conversation, she said that our thoughts will disrupt us and we'll stop listening. The conversation will be like two ships passing in the night, never quite on the same page, as we ask questions and comment things unrelated to what the speaker was talking about. And then in our textbook, Communication in the Real World, the author explains that misunderstanding can come from distorted listening. So we either fail to hear the setup or miss important details of what we're supposed to be listening to. And we miss the point or begin to make assumptions to fill in the gaps of what we've missed. And you can see how this can negatively affect the conversation and what we understood about it when we guess the meaning behind what they said and come to our own conclusions. And then poor listening negatively affects the speaker as well. In the article, How Poor Communication Causes Stress, Elizabeth Scott explains how poor listening allows for a cycle of one-sided conversation. She says, this creates a situation where listening isn't really happening, so understanding cannot take place. This wastes both people's time and brings them no closer to one another when personal details are being shared, and no closer to a resolution when done in an important discussion. So the speaker likely knows that they're not really being listened to, and they can begin to feel like their conversations that they're having are pointless. And how do you feel when you're trying to talk to someone and they aren't listening or paying attention? It drives down the desire to keep talking to them. This idea is kind of furthered again in Communication in the Real World, where they say emotional support in the form of empathetic listening and validation during times of conflict can help relational partners manage common stresses of relationships that may otherwise lead a partnership to deteriorate. So when those needs aren't being met, the relationship is at greater risk. Now that we've looked at some of at how poor listening skills can negatively affect relationships, let's get into how good skills can improve and strengthen relationships, which is hopefully what we're all here for. Having good listening skills will improve relationships and help build a healthy foundation for them to grow on, as we've all seen in our own personal lives. And 5.1, Communication in the Real World, it's stated that empathetic listening can help us expand our self and social awareness by learning from other people's experiences and by helping us take on different perspectives. So we always have something that can be learned from the people we're listening to, whether it's a new perspective or information, just details about their lives. It's all learning. And Celeste Headlee kind of backs this up when she said, assume that you have something to learn, because you do. We all do. And we always have opportunities to learn. So learning is growth, and like I said, we're given plenty of opportunities to learn in our everyday conversations, all over, but especially in our conversations. And according to the article, How to Practice Active Listening by Arlen Kunzik, active listening allows you to understand problems and collaborate to develop solutions. So you're fully able to understand the information that's being presented to you. You can work with the information to your fullest abilities when you really understand it. And again, this presents an even better opportunity for full growth and improvement overall. And being a good listener also helps the speaker feel appreciated and makes them more willing to accept feedback for them to grow as well. Like we've talked about, you don't want to leave them feeling like they're in a pointless conversation. But according to Jack Zenger and Joseph Folkman, they wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review called What Great Listeners Actually Do. And good listening is invariably included some feedback provided in a way others would accept and that open up alternative paths to consider. If the speaker feels like you've been listening, and if you have been listening, you'll be able to provide applicable feedback in an appropriate tone for the conversation at hand. If you've been listening, you'll know what to say, and they'll see that you're responding in a reasonable way to what they've been saying. And now that we can kind of see how listening affects our relationships, both for the best, for good and for bad, it's really important that we practice the techniques to be able to have good conversations and improve our listening. So speaking and responding are an important part of the conversation process. And there are certain times when speaking is important for the listener to do as well. You're not just going to sit and listen to someone talk forever. But when someone is telling you a story, Celeste Headley recommends you don't try to equate your experience with theirs. She said conversations are not a promotional opportunity. Instead, when you're trying to respond to them, instead of telling them a similar story, ask for more details and ask open-ended questions so they can really explain how they felt or all the details and you can understand it better. And don't try to read the speaker's mind. When you're just several steps ahead of them, you're missing a lot of what they're saying. And it allows for a lot of misinterpretation, which is never good in conversation. And then in communication in the real world, they say it leads to jumping to conclusions, which shortcuts the critical evaluation process. It's taking out all of our ability to really understand people and have just a genuine conversation with them, with what they're saying to us instead of what we're interpreting them as saying. You don't want to get caught up in what you think they're going to say. And according to Celeste Headley, you can't really show that you're actively listening if you actually are. You know, we're taught to lean forward and look at the person, not to look around. But if you're listening, the habits that you have in the conversation are going to show. And they'll know. So it's best to just really, truly pay attention. And we're all better off for it. So if we look back at what we've learned here, we can see how both poor listening and good listening skills are quite impactful for both the speaker and the listener, and our relationships depend on how good we are at listening. And we've also learned some skills to hopefully keep in mind so we can be better listeners and have better conversations. So the next time you're in a conversation, think back to how it feels to be ignored or in a conversation that isn't really fulfilling, and then think about how good a productive conversation feels for everyone involved. Use those same skills and the ones that we've learned today, and you're going to have much more successful, productive, and satisfying conversations in the future, which we all really, really want.